thanks to a lot of energy. Doesn't that violate the second principle of thermodynamics? Shouldn't have been annihilated by the energy coming in? Now, that was a joke. Thank you. Okay, the question was about what?
The question simply said, what about...
This is fun, by the way.
Divinely
You should try one of these days.
What about divinely inspired
inspired evolution. Well, I don't know, but you sure could be. Yeah, you can make the argument that that kind of God would be fairly wasteful. But then again, you know, who are we to make the argument about God's wastefulness or not? I think that was one of your objections before. So maybe we don't know. Maybe that is the best way that God can make things, and that's the way it happened. I have no idea. Again, evolution's got nothing to do, evolutionary biologists have nothing to say about theology. If you want to believe it that way, that's fine. There's plenty of evolutionary biologists. There's a colleague of mine, Dr. Miller at Brown University, who believes exactly that. He's written a book, if you're interested in that, called Finding Darwin's God or something like that. And that's the theory that he proposes. That's fine, but that you should know, reading the book, that that's not evolutionary biology. That's his version of theology. Maybe right or not.
Dr. Pagliuca, why do animals and humans not evolve today?
They do. I tried to explain this several times. Yes, they do. Animals and humans change their genetic constitutions all the time, every day. Therefore, they are evolving by definition. Now, the question might be, why is it that we don't see species appearing every time, every day? That's a good question. The answer to that is because the speciation process is actually pretty slow, as Darwin did propose. But as I said before, we have observed historical events of speciation, so that's not a problem for evolutionary theory either. And incidentally, talking about Darwin and quoting in a, shall we say, a selective way, that passage from Darwin, from The Origin of Species, that said it may seem absurd that to believe that the eye evolved by natural means. You should have smelled a rat there. The word was, it may seem absurd. You should know that if you go and check that quote, immediately afterwards, Darwin goes on into half a chapter in which he tries to explain how, in fact, the eye evolved. So he says, you know, at first view, it might seem like an absurd thing, but here it is how, in fact, it can happen, and this is what evolutionary biologists has found so far. Selective quoting is pretty dangerous.
Well, we're going to be here all week. Here's the quote. I have the book in the car. I'll get it out next time. He said, to suppose that the eye, with all of its intricable mechanisms for adjusting to light, he has a whole bunch of descriptions of the eye in there, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. Go ahead and read the rest of page 217, 218, and 219, where he talks about his theory of how it might have happened, but it's all speculation. That's not science. Here's how it might have happened. That's what you did. Well, it might have happened, you know, from a one-spotted critter. I'm sorry, that's not science. As far as, was the question about why don't we see animals and humans evolving today? Is that the question we're discussing now?
Why do animals and humans not evolve today?
Well, because God designed them to bring forth after their kind, and that's all they're going to do. Humans are always going to have humans. You might get a big one or a little one, but it's always going to be a human. That doesn't happen. Evolution doesn't happen. So to me, I don't have a problem with that question.
Dr. Hovind, did you teach evolution when you were a teacher in high school? Were you a Christian then?
I was a Christian. I became a Christian at age 16. As I taught school, I taught science, and I tried to teach all sides of the theory. If evolution was presented in the book, I would say, here's one theory. Now here's the evidence against this theory. Here they're telling the kids, you know, you have similar bone structures in your arm compared to a whale. Okay, they can interpret that to be proof of a common ancestor, or you can interpret that to be proof of a common designer. The hubcaps from a Honda Accord will fit on a Honda Prelude. That proves they both evolved from a Chevy 84 million years ago. No, they have similarities because we have a common designer. That's just obvious. So I taught my kids to study science objectively, realistically. Let's look at this, and don't get brainwashed. Don't get taught what to believe. You know, learn how to really think about this. Somebody tells you the human embryo has gill slits, and that proves it used to be a fish. You better study the history of that. That was proven wrong in 1874. Those little folds of skin develop into bones in the ear and glands in the throat. They never have anything to do with breathing. I've seen fat folks that have 5 or 6 chins, and they cannot breathe through any of them but the top one. Okay? Those are not gill slits, and that should not be in the textbooks. So I taught my kids to study science objectively. Okay?
Sure, thanks. This equal time teaching thing is something that needs to be discussed. Education is not about equal time teaching. I mean, if that were the case, then you would be teaching the Copernican theory and the Ptolemaic theory. You would be teaching that the Earth rotates around the Sun and the Sun rotates around the Earth. That's because there are two theories. In fact, historically, there were two theories. Now, that was about 400 and something years ago. Now we know better, therefore we don't teach Ptolemaios anymore. The day in which somebody finds out that Copernicus was wrong, which is pretty difficult, then we'll teach something else. The same goes for creation and evolution. I mean, creation was a viable theory at one time in history. The last time that was the case was around 1850s. After that, it has not been a viable scientific theory, which is why we don't teach it. I mean, teaching evolution, in schools, not only public schools, but any schools, should be about critical thinking based on the observations and the facts available. It's not about dogma. No evolutionary biologist should ever teach evolution as a dogma, and if they do, they're simply mistaken. They don't understand what education is all about. But it is the only viable theory at this point, scientific theory at this point. It may be wrong, perhaps. But certainly creationism is not the alternative.
This may have been addressed, but forgive or blame the moderator if it has. Do you believe, Dr. Pagliuca, that the tailbone is vestigial?
That the tailbone is vestigial. Oh, I see. Okay, yes, let's talk about these vestigial things, because I know that Mr. Owen, if I say yes, Mr. Owen will say, well, then why don't we I'll pay for a operation for your tailbone to be taken out and see how you feel. Right? I'm learning the game here. Okay. Now, it is very serious, you're right, but, vestigial organs are not, contrary to what most people think, organs that don't have any function. If they didn't have any function, they probably would have been lost long ago. These are organs that used to have a different function, and they now have shifted to something else. A great example of it is if you observe many animals that live in caves. Animals that live in caves usually either don't have eyes or they have greatly reduced eyes. The reason for that's a great example of when you find very reduced eyes in cave animals, it's a great example of evolution, because the reason that happens is because it costs metabolically quite a bit for the organism to build the eye. It's a complex structure, so it costs energy, okay? And if you don't need it, then there will be natural selection against forming eyes, which is exactly what we see. So you see over a period of time, with all the integradations that you want, you see the eyes disappearing in cave animals, so that you can find the cave animals that have non-functional eyes and eyes that are only half there or a quarter there, and they're completely gone. That is the way vestigial organs work. So in the case of the tailbone, it's the same situation. The tailbone doesn't function anymore as it does in other primates, that is, as a tailbone, because we don't have any tails anymore. But it does have other functions. There are some muscles that are attached to it, so you can't get rid of it entirely. But it is exactly the same bone that other animals, very close related to us, actually use as a tailbone, which is, again, how evolution works, by changing things around gradually, little by little.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I certainly would pay to have yours removed anytime you'd like. You mentioned about cave animals losing their eyes, and you said this is a great example of evolution. I think it should be obvious to a kindergartner that losing something is not evolution. That's the opposite of evolution. You're going backwards in time, okay? You're losing something, not gaining something. The textbook says the appendix is vestigial because you don't need it anymore. Well, you better study your anatomy, because the appendix is part of the immune system. You can live without your appendix, that's true, but if your appendix is taken out, you have a higher susceptibility to many diseases. You could live without both your legs and both your arms and both your eyes also. That doesn't prove you don't need them, okay? You do need your appendix. By the way, that's not reader.